It's tabletop time, I'm Dave, and today I'm bringing you something I'm super excited for. I can barely contain my excitement because I am painting my old Chaos Raptors. Yes, I got this kit when I first started out because I thought that was so cool, and they are. I really think they hold up. But as a 13-year-old, I quickly realized that putting metal models together was a exercise in patience, skill, talent that I did not have. But now I do, I'm grown. So I'm gonna build these old Chaos Raptors, but I'm not using them for 40K, no. These old designs I think will go perfectly for something else. You see, I'm really excited about Horus Heresy, so I'm gonna be making some late Heresy Alpha Legion Raptors. All right, these Raptors have sat almost untouched since I was a kid. The plastic has yellowed. We have the one Raptor that I managed to paint. Oh my goodness. I don't repaint my stuff. I don't strip my models, so this is a worthy sacrifice of actually I'm going to strip a model because it's time to make use of the rest of this squad. And if this model stays painted, the squad is wasted. So goodbye. Goodbye, my sweet Raptor. I'll miss you. Let's look at the rest of them. We have a Raptor with a special weapon. Now this is going to have to change because Heresy Assault Squads can't take special weapons. All right, we have Sergeant who has dual lightning claws. Needs a bit of a cleanup. That is legal. This is Heresy legal. We can do this. We have Chainsword Bolt Pistol, legal. Easy peasy. And finally, Chainsword Plasma Pistol, also legal. We can run Chainsword Plasma Pistol 1 per 5. All right, so I'm pretty keen to get started building these. They are cool models. I really think they're gonna hold up with a modern paint job. Maybe not next to modern Chaos Space Marines with all the Baroque trim, but certainly in the Horus Heresy as late Heresy sort of custom, maybe Alpha Legion special issue equipment. I think they might work. The only thing that's a bit dark is the claws on their feet, but thankfully with these old designs, the claws are actually mechanical rather than demonic, so it could be justified as a Dark Mechanicus like contraption that's a prototype. I think they're gonna work, but I need to convert at least the one with the special weapon. Luckily, I've brought some bits from home. I've got Raptors, I got heaps of bits, Forge World weapons that I've collected over the years, fine cast, loose Chaos bits, Alpha Legion. This is a tiny fraction of my bits collection, but it is the most Horus Heresy related bit of my collection. So I think there should be enough in here from old Forge World weapon packs that I can convert this guy into something that fits in the Heresy, and I'm just gonna get started. So it had been quite some time since I worked with pewter, and in getting clippers out and starting to work on this model, I immediately realized why I hadn't finished it when I was a kid. Working with pewter requires a little bit of physical strength and a fair bit of resilience and a lot of patience. I distinctly remember using the hand-me-down terrible blunt pliers on pewter models to try and get off sprue tags, desperately fighting with them to get them off, as well as using the sort of blunted hobby knife I was allowed as a child to try and scrape away the pewter. As an adult, this is a fairly easy endeavor. It's a very soft metal and it's quite easy to scrape off and cut. But as a child, I definitely remember struggling with this. It was a real deterrent and one of the reasons I didn't clean up my models nearly as well as I intend to today. So one of the biggest problems with these metal models back in the day on 25mm bases is they were very top heavy and they'd often overbalance. So with that said, I knew I would have to pin these models. Pinning pewter models is harder than pinning plastic models because of course drilling pewter is harder than plastic, but arguably it's more important. One of the other things I wanted to make sure I do, as I do with pretty much all my models, is drill my barrels. With the pewter especially, it was important to make a little center mark with a knife to notch it in, a place where the drill could find purchase, and then rather than trying to drill a deep hole, just drill an indent. This indent I will then paint black, but will give the nice look of a drill barrel on all of my weapons. So as I started preparing all these models, I looked across at the 5th Raptor, a model I'd painted in my childhood, who ultimately would have to make the paint sacrifice for me to complete this project. I'm usually very anti-stripping models. I love to keep the models, every single one of them that I've painted in the past, as a record of my hobby journey. And under almost all other circumstances, I wouldn't strip one of my classic models, but given that I only ever painted one, and they're an out of production, very cool old kit, I think I have to make the sacrifice. He was ready to take all the paint off within a couple of minutes, and it came off super easily with a toothbrush. With that that done, I sadly salute and say goodbye to my classic paint job, but I rest easy knowing that it has been recorded on YouTube forever. Pour one out for me, boy, as we move on to assembling these raptors and getting them ready for their new life. So recently, Games Workshop have invited a whole bunch of creators over to Warhammer World to get involved in their Horus Heresy events and get some of the new plastic ahead of time. It's really exciting to see Games Workshop finally reaching out to content creators and seeing so many people getting involved. Just to name a few, I'm really keen to see what Zorpazorp does with it, Ninjon, Pete the Wargamer, so many great creators, and they're only the videos I've watched up to now. I'm sure there's heaps of videos being released. I've been checking the tag and watching everyone's content as it's been coming out. Now, unfortunately for Tabletop Time, we didn't get the opportunity to play Horus Heresy with all the cool kids. So I'm making my own Horus Heresy. At least that's the plan for these models. So one of the models is equipped with a plasma gun or a flame or a melter gun as built, but in Horus Heresy, I can't take those options. Now, being a pewter model, it would be exceptionally difficult for me to repose these arms, so I have fairly limited options. Ideally, given the way his hands are positioned, I'd love a left-handed chainsword, but unfortunately, I couldn't find one. So what I did is I found a left-handed bolter from a Loyalist kit that had been abandoned long ago. It even has some old paint on it. Then I grabbed a Chaos chainsword from the old Chaos Space Marine kit. I clipped out the handle, bent the guard, carved off the back of it a little bit so it would fit better on the pewter model, and glued it onto the hand. I don't think this is the most amazing pose in the world, but I do think it's passable and certainly looks era appropriate for the time these models were sculpted. And most importantly, his war gear is appropriate for the game. I have a lot of plans for my Alpha Legion. I want to make a really themed force that is a lot less nebulous than the Alpha Legion is often presented. I'm planning on converting a whole bunch of really specific character models that tell a lot of story, such as the leader or praetor of my warband, who is actually a Davonite Lodge member with close ties to the Sons of Horus, which will be reflected throughout the force. I want to have subtle nods to chaos throughout this Horus Heresy force and represent a slightly more traitorous dark side to the Siege of Terra era Alpha Legion. So one of the great things about making these models for Horus Heresy is that all the Space Marines have been moved up to 32mm bases. My idea for these is to actually use the slaughter base to my advantage. I trimmed the slaughter bases down until they're short enough to fit between the corded segments of the Cobalt Key bases. By trimming down these bases and using a 32mm, I was no longer restricted to the positioning of the slot in the base as well, which meant that I could actually position the models with the center of gravity over the center of the base, which means for tipping, these are actually, well, for giant pewter models, relatively resilient. While I was gluing all of these models on, they went down without a hitch, with the exception of the Sergeant. Maybe it was 20 years of rattling around in a box, maybe I just bumped it and didn't notice. But the little flamey tuft that all the Raptors float on for him had been bent so many times that it was brittle and it fell off, literally just fell off while I was attempting to work with the model. So instead of trying to glue that on and chase the rabbit hole of fixing it, instead I decided to just pin the model onto the base with some steel rod. Knowing that I needed to use a H-column to hide this pin, I decided on an urban basing scheme, or battlefield debris for all of my models. I used sections of H-beam as well as some wire mesh to add the man-made elements, and then I used some spare plaster cast rocks that we had, as well as foam core and small stones. To tie all these elements of the basing together, I used Astro Granite debris from Games Workshop. So the models are built and I'm really happy with them. It's taking longer than I anticipated. I kind of forgot how long it would take to clean up these models, pin them and assemble them. But unlike the modern models, the challenge of it has made it really engaging and satisfying. Every single limb is a micro puzzle. So as a veteran hobbyist like me, it was actually really satisfying to sink my teeth into. So one thing that's fun to notice is as I open this drawer, which has some Chaos Space Marine Raptors in, the current kit, I notice that the scale of the models is actually smaller than these classic models. That's, I think, part of the reason why these Raptors hold up so well. They were big for the time. So I think they'll fit right at home with the slightly upscaled models in the new Horus Heresy. To start with painting my Raptors, I went with Vallejo's Imperial Blue. This is pretty close to Citadel's Cantor Blue, which is how I painted all of my Chaos Space Marines originally. I think the reason I start with this color is because I quite like the idea of being able to repaint a lot of my models without completely redoing the paint job, just updating the core armor color to the new teal. Following on from that, I airbrush in scurvy green and then jade green at increasingly high angles to have a little bit of a gradient. With these models, I ultimately came in slightly too bright, I think, from above, but I think it also really suits the retro vibe. This is a new paint scheme for me, and it's not so much of a problem that I want to go back and rechange it. It's more just an adjustment for the next time. I'll make sure that gradient is slightly darker towards the bottom. As a final step, I just quickly airbrushed charcoal gray onto the base to make sure all that teal overspray hadn't been left everywhere, and then moved on to hand painting. I decided to move away from metallics with this project, preferring instead to use my quick tabletop standard non-metallic metal. I say quick, it's definitely not as quick as using true metallics, but it's also a lot faster than trying to do reflective surface highlights and proper lighting. It gives the idea of metal surfaces, and I think it works pretty well. Finally, there are a few spot areas of detailing. I went for purple for the tertiary color and some skins and bones on the sergeant. Now, using 3 non-metallic metals in the same model is always a bit of a challenge to make sure their tones are different. So for all of the regular steel components, the sharp slashy bits rather than the Baroque trim, I used wolf gray to keep them in a bit of a blue tone. On the lightning claws especially, I just put in some somber gray to establish the highlight areas before highlighting everything with wolf gray, making sure to run along all the sharp edges, line highlighting everything neatly. With this silver done, I decided that the armor looked a little bit flat. So I mixed the brightest of the greens, the jade green, with some white and made a kind of minty highlight. This is almost pulling too far away from Alpha Legion for me, but hey, I committed. And at the end of the day, after line highlighting all the rivets and the raised surfaces, I do like the level of contrast and interest it's brought to the models. So at this stage of the project, it was the end of the work day and almost the work week, but I was having too much fun. So I sneakily took my models home. When I was at home, I could sort of pore over some details. First thing I did was the face. This sergeant's model is really gnarly. He has his skull exposed with heaps of cables going into them. So I wanted to paint the skull. To do that, I mixed in a bunch of green with khakis. That was actually Nurgle Plague green to create a kind of rotten old bone appearance. I put that in all the lowlights, brought it back up with khaki, and then highlighted all of it with bone white. For the face, I base coated in heavy skin tone and then highlighted with heavy warm grey, using Carroburg Crimson and Reichland Flesh Shade washes to give a little bit of torture to the skin. For the tabard on the sergeant, I realized something that had been bugging me with my Alpha Legion. I'd always picked a beautiful purple as a secondary color, and it had worked really well when my army was predominantly Cantor blue. Now, I've learned a lot since I painted then, and I've learned a bit about color theory. And I realized that that's because they were complementary colors, this dark blue with regal purple. But when I shifted my color scheme into the teal, suddenly that same regal purple actually isn't a good match at all. So looking at contrasting colors and triangle color theory, I actually moved the purple more towards a pinky purple, that red purple right between the line, burgundy kind of look. I based it in Barakana Burgundy from Citadel, then I moved up through Screamer Pink into Pink Horror as a little dabbled highlight on the top. I'm actually really happy with how this looks. It's so much better than the purple, and I'll be using this instead of purple moving forward. Now that I had my models back at the studio, it was time to put on the finishing touches. One of these was on the plasma gun Raptor, where I painted on a white to gray gradient, then put warp lightning contrast on it. This was way too dark, and I won't be doing this exact method in the future. So I came back in with some white, brought it up, and then used the fluo green from Vallejo to kind of try and blend that in and fix it up a bit. For the eyes, I went with pure white, and then I used some Griff Hound orange contrast paint in the eyes to give a little bit of a splash glow around them and also tint them. And then I used Avalon Sunset mixed with white to do 2 further highlights in each eye. I also wanted to put some transfers on the model. This time I was bringing my stuff from home. So I had my Mr. Mark setter and softer, which are my preferred decal setters. They're really good, fantastic products, and I recommend them. Not sponsored, just they're really good. With a good varnish over the whole model to get rid of the sheen, they really do look uniform and fit nicely on the model. For the ground cover itself, I dry brushed on Storm Vermin Fur onto any of the rocks, and then I dry brushed cold gray onto all the gravel on the ground. On the rebar and metal elements, I sponged on 3 different browns, one of course being rust, and then I did a little gentle rough highlight on some of the pieces of metal where there wasn't any rust in somber gray and wolf gray. As a final touch, I used some Vallejo Burnt Umber Weathering Pigment, applying that onto the lower parts of the body, especially towards the feet and claws, and liberally all over the base. Thank you once again to all of our wonderful patrons for your support. And we welcome our newest members, Kevin Chester and Matthew Mayo. It's thanks to your support that we can keep up our rapid pace of awesome mini content and deliver the huge variety of different types of content that we do. If you love our videos and would like to support what we do, consider signing up to our Patreon. You can take part in a monthly mini review with our crew, as well as access weekly behind the scenes videos and become part of our exclusive Discord community. And here we are at the end of another video, and I'm really happy with these models. I am excited to play Horus Heresy, I'm excited to use them in Heresy, and surprisingly, I'd even be proud to use them in 40k. Now my only issue is if I want to expand this into a 10-man squad, I have to get another one of those boxes, and the Sergeant is sculpted exactly as he is. So I'm gonna need to hunt around for 5 generic Raptors without any special weapons from this era to finish out my assault squad. If you've got any ideas for how I could expand my Heresy company or what sort of things you'd like to see, I'd also love to hear it. I love making these passionate videos where I get to delve into the lore and start talking about new armies and projects. So if that's what you want to see, we'd love to hear about it. Subscribe, like, and all that good stuff, and we'll be back soon with some more content. See you then.